Wait, you're here? It's a Sunday. You're telling me you want to learn history on a Sunday? There's a Packer game in 10 minutes. I got things to do. But I guess, who am I to discourage my students from learning? I guess I'll oblige you. Let's start by talking about something a little bit different. Let's talk about the GOAT debate. Get that GOAT out of here. Not that type of GOAT. I'm talking about the GOAT debate in sports, as in the greatest of all time. You know, it's hotly debated in a lot of sports. Who is the best? And also, how do you calculate that? For example, in football, most people would say that Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, but I would ride for Aaron Rodgers all day. And I know he doesn't have the championships to back it up, but no one has thrown the football the way that he has. And had the Packers not mismanaged a number of different scenarios, we would easily be talking about Aaron Rodgers as the greatest of all time, but I digress. When it comes to basketball, the argument is generally between LeBron James and Michael Jordan. I, of course, ride for Michael Jordan. I think it's pretty clear, but many would disagree with me. And there's other people who think that somebody like Kobe Bryant or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would be the best basketball players of all time. Whatever sport it is, we could argue back and forth about who we think is the greatest. And it really comes down, again, to our worldview. And you may not think about that in regards to sports, but it definitely fits, because your definition of greatness is going to decide who you think is the greatest of all time. One might say that Michael Jordan is better than LeBron James because he has 6 titles compared to LeBron's 3. But some might say that you have to go off of stats and scoring. It all comes down to what you believe greatness is. And that's what I'd like you to consider today. What is greatness? And let's think about that historically. Is there a GOAT when it comes to history? Many people would say yes, and his name was Alexander the Great. Let's go. The nickname of the Great is not one that's lightly given throughout world history, but in Alexander's case, he's probably one of the most famous people to ever be called the Great. We want to talk today about whether or not he is deserving of that title. Does Alexander truly exude greatness, as many would believe? But Alexander himself is a product of the Greek world, and his circumstances are a little bit different than what you might expect, and it's important to understand the context of what's going on at this time. Remember, in our last video, we described how Greece is just coming out of the aftermath of the Peloponnesian War, a 27-year-long civil war between Athens and Sparta that has left Greece more disunified amongst its city-states than it's ever been before. While the Greeks were distracted by their own civil war and conflicts, a new kingdom, Macedonia, was growing in power just to the north over the mountains of Greece. Philip II, king of Macedonia, who took the throne in 359 BC, strongly admired Greek culture and dreamed of uniting Macedonia with Greece. But remember, the Greeks had a negative view of anyone who was non-Greek. Remember how they treated the Persians. In this case, they believed the Macedonians to be barbarous invaders from the north who were backward and unlike the Greeks. So because of this dream of uniting these two kingdoms was never going to happen. So Philip began to slowly invade Greece, adding many city-states to the Macedonian now growing empire through diplomacy, bribes, and military conquest. And meanwhile, the Athenians, the so-called leaders of the Greek world, continued to ignore the growing threat of Macedonia. The Athenian politician Demosthenes warned, just as Themistocles had earlier about the Persians, that Macedonia was a threat that shouldn't be taken lightly. But by the time the Athenians took action, it was too late. At the Battle of Chaeronea, Philip the Great's army, which featured a massive cavalry force, was able to overwhelm the Athenians and other Greek city-states, allowing Philip official control of all Greek mainland. The key here was that not only did Macedonia have a military advantage with their cavalry, they were united. And as we discussed during the Peloponnesian War, this was not the case with the Greek city-states. So now Macedonia was in control of Greece and most of the Mediterranean Sea. But Philip wasn't done there. He had a dream of moving into Persia and conquering what was the great Persian Empire, to build the largest empire in the world. But unfortunately for Philip, this dream never became a reality because he was assassinated before he could ever start another invasion. Thanks to the maneuverings of his wife Olympia, Philip II's son, Alexander, became king at the young age of 20. However, Philip had long prepared Alexander to be king. He had been trained by the Greek philosopher Aristotle and prepared to be a military leader all of his life. Alexander shared the same dream his father did of conquering the known world. And he wasted no time. By 331 BC, he had already sent ships across the Dardanelles, the waterway between Turkey and Greece, and began to invade the Persian Empire. In just 3 years, by 331 BC, Alexander had conquered major capitals of the Persian Empire, including Jerusalem and Babylon, and he was even crowned pharaoh in Egypt. As he moved towards the east, Alexander was hailed by a conquering hero by many different civilizations and recognized already for his greatness. And as he went, he built different structures, monuments, and cities, often named Alexandria after himself, to respond to his greatness. Alexander's military certainly was successful and one of the most dominant armies in world history to this point. However, it had help. Persia under the reign of Darius III was not as unified as it had once been. It had been weakened during the Persian Wars, and because of that, Alexander was able to steamroll through it. It's the historical equivalent of LeBron and the Cavs rolling through the East. There just isn't any competition worthy of Alexander at this point. And it's because of that Alexander remains greedy. He didn't stop with Persia. Even though he had already conquered everything he had already dreamed, he wanted to continue eastward, to build an empire that stretched to the edge of the world. In 326 BC, Alexander and his army crossed into India over the Hindu Kush mountains, where they faced what was the Mauryan Empire, who used elephants in their military, gaining a major advantage over Alexander and his troops. While Alexander never officially lost a battle, this was the closest he ever was, and he was forced to retreat and regroup because his troops were so tired and weary from this long journey of conquest. As Alexander returned back to Babylon to regroup, he planned on returning east and continuing his expansion to the edge of the world. But unfortunately, at the age of 32, Alexander succumbed to a fever and died, cutting short the legacy of what could have been one of the greatest rulers in all of world history. But there are a lot of what-ifs there. Alexander had conquered the known world, a great achievement in his own right, and it also left behind numerous pieces of evidence that pointed to his greatness, including the numerous cities of Alexandria and the monuments left to glorify him. It's truly what Alexander left behind that declares his greatness. His empire was so vast, he didn't know who should succeed him. In fact, on his deathbed, when they asked, "Who is your heir?" he didn't have kids. He responded with, "Whoever is the strongest." What ensued was a long series of wars and conflicts between Alexander's generals over who would control what was left of the Macedonian Empire. It resulted in 3 separate empires. His general Antigonus started the Antigonid dynasty, which ruled Turkey and Palestine. Another general, Seleucus, created the Seleucid dynasty, which you can see in orange, ruling what was the Persian Empire in Mesopotamia. And finally, the Ptolemies, which you can see in purple, ruled what is now Egypt. These empires would characterize the coming centuries of world history and would be important players on the world stage. Yet when it comes back to Alexander, historically, so many people are often confused, assuming that he himself was Greek. He wasn't. He was Macedonian, and he led the Macedonian Empire. Yet remember what Philip wanted. Philip wanted to be united with Greece. They admired Greek culture so much. And Alexander, just like Philip, had this same respect for Greece and its culture. Because of that, the Macedonian Empire was a preserver of Greek culture. And so through Alexander's conquest, Greek culture began to spread outside of Greece and into the Middle East and other parts of the world. And along the way, it clashed with other cultures, not just Persia, but also Christian cultures, Egyptian cultures, Jewish cultures, and even Indian cultures. And it created a brand new form of culture called Hellenism. At its root, Hellenism is Greek culture, but it's a combination of all those other ones we just mentioned, and it's also the spread of these things throughout the world. This is where Alexander's greatness lies, because he allowed the Greek foundations of culture to be a part of every country worldwide. This can't be underestimated. It's why religions like Christianity and Judaism continue to survive. It's why we still see Greek architecture and aspects of Greek philosophy and education in our system still today. The best example of Hellenism in action is the city of Alexandria, the one that was in Egypt. This became a center for Greek culture, despite the fact it wasn't even in Greece, it was in Egypt. And the best symbol of it was the Lighthouse of Alexandria, which shined the literal light of Greece into the rest of the world. Hellenism provided a level of connection worldwide that we hadn't seen yet before, and with that, Greek became the predominant language spoken throughout the world. Most people would be able to speak Greek. Take, for example, the Bible. When the New Testament is written, it was mostly written in Greek because most people living in Palestine would have also understood Greek. Greek ideas of philosophy and education will also come to the forefront thanks to Hellenism. During this time, the mathematician Pythagoras invents the Pythagorean theorem, which will be very important not only in geometry, but also architecture. Inventors like Archimedes invented new simple machines and levers and pulleys that revolutionized the way work was done. There were even Greek astronomers who argued that the Earth rotated around the sun and that it was tilted on an axis. They were truly ahead of their time. And the Greek physician Hippocrates pioneered what it meant to be a doctor, examining what made people sick and how to cure them, and also creating the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have a responsibility to do everything they can to help a patient, no matter what the circumstances. Maybe most importantly, the Greek concept of a gymnasium was introduced to the world. Not a place to work out, but more so a place to learn. While gymnasiums weren't necessarily schools, they're probably the best foundation of modern education that we have in the ancient world. It's safe to say that the events of Alexander's lifetime changed the world forever. Now, is that deserving of the title of the Great? Did Alexander truly demonstrate greatness? Well, again, that's up to you. Now, Alexander did conquer all of the known world by the age of 32. That's unprecedented, and it hasn't really happened since. Look at the effects of Hellenism and everything that Alexander's empire did for the rest of history. There could be some greatness involved there. But again, I encourage you to consider what greatness truly might be. See, in the world's eyes, Alexander was probably great. But does any of that even matter? Matthew 16:26 says, "For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall man give in return for his soul?" Sure, Alexander gained the whole world, but did he lose his soul? I mean, I don't want to gain the whole world and lose my soul. Meaning, I don't want to have everything I could ever want, but not have my relationship with God and Jesus Christ. Because that's what gives me meaning. That's what gives life meaning. And at the same time, when it comes to this concept of greatness, man has such a clear idea of what greatness is. But it's not even close to what God says. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." God looks right here. That's where he measures greatness. See, the true measure of a man is not his achievements or what he does in this world. The measure of a man isn't how tall he is in the eyes of the world. It's truly his heart. That's where you can be truly great. That's where I can be truly great. We're never going to conquer parts of the world. And even if we did, and even if we had some spectacular achievements, they still wouldn't measure up to what God wants for us in our hearts. So when you think about greatness, that's what I hope you think about. In the meantime, historically, yes, we can continue to look at who was great, who had achievements that were unlike anything else in the world, that were unprecedented. There's going to be plenty of those people. In fact, just after Alexander, there's going to be a series of different leaders in a different empire that have legitimate claims at being great. But of course, that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.